Hi, welcome to the first conversation hour of While You're Here Collective. And our first guest is Swakshadip. They are a PhD candidate at the Victoria University of Wellington. Could you start by talking about your research?
Sure. So I'm a PhD candidate at University of Wellington at the School of Social and Cultural Studies, and I recently defended my thesis at the beginning of this month. So I'm working with trans asylum seekers and refugees in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Yeah, and sort of the institutional access and the sort of barriers that they face in accessing institutions, social services, and support. So that's a bit about my research. Yeah.
When did you start? How did it happen? Why New Zealand, of all the
Okay.
places?
Uh, yeah, I started my PhD in 2021. So I was very interested in the sort of intersection of being trans and being asylum seeker or refugees. But yeah, because I did my both my undergrad and my master's in the UK, so I think I was more knowledgeable about the UK aspect. And then I think I got admission into a PhD program in Wellington, and that's how life took me to New Zealand. Yeah, and then I think I did the research in New Zealand because, of course, New Zealand is a very interesting country in terms of being progressive and being like at least in terms of international image, New Zealand portrays itself to be very progressive and very inclusive on a global stage. So yeah, I think, and also because I was based in New Zealand, so data collection was much easier than doing it somewhere else.
Especially
So
in India.
yeah, I mean, in India, the thing is, because India is not a covenant of the 1951 Refugee Convention, neither the 1961 Protocol. So India doesn't really have like procedures for someone to claim asylum and be a refugee here. Of course, India hosts a huge refugee population, but they come in mainly through the UNHCR programs and not like through the government. So yeah, I mean, and India, because India doesn't have like asylum programs, so it is nearly impossible for trans people to come here and claim asylum. Also, yeah, I mean, India has so many, I mean, India, like so many other countries, has so many problems with, the trans laws itself that, yeah, I think that is definitely one thing, and that I'll definitely talk about later in the conversation.
Okay. So, what are your plans in the future? Do you plan on coming back to India, or do you plan on settling in New Zealand? And
I'm currently in India.
oh yeah, I could tell by the
Background, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm currently in India. At the moment, I think I'm just planning my next steps. So, yeah, no concrete plans yet. I think I'm just trying my luck here and there, especially with the kind of market, that is there right now, even in the academic space as well. Yeah.
So did you get like a cultural shock when you went to New Zealand, and what were like the things which you found were different as compared to India? Of course, there's political change, there's cultural change, etc. But what did you find personally which was different there?
I think I think so I went to New Zealand like 1.5 years into my PhD because the borders were closed before that due to COVID. So yeah, I mean, I was not the typical fresher, like in New Zealand, trying to explore things at the beginning of my PhD and stuff. Like I went there and I started collecting data. So I was like 1.5 years into my PhD, and like I already spent like half of the time I was supposed to be collecting my data here in India.
So, could you talk a little bit more about your research? Like, what led you to the kind of research that you did? Like, we all have our ways, right? When you were doing PhD, how did you end up with the research that you ended up with?
Yeah, uh, I think my lived experiences as a gender diverse person and also a migrant previously definitely impacted the sort of thing that I wanted to research, the sort of area that I wanted to research in. Yeah, I think apart from that, like I have my own lived experiences of being gender diverse in the global south, in India. Yeah, I think that also kind of helped me connect with my participants when I was doing the research as well, when I was doing field work. That helped me a lot to connect with my participants because, I mean, of course, global south is not all same. Firstly, but again, there is some shared aspects that we have. Yeah, like we have some shared sort of experiences of colonization. We have shared experiences of like being gender diverse in, like sometimes very hostile environments. So, we did have many shared experiences as well. Of course, there were differences because I didn't have any experience of claiming asylum, and that's a whole different conversation altogether. Like, of course, migration is definitely one aspect, but seeking asylum is a whole different aspect altogether. Mainly because of the resources as well that are available to asylum seekers. So yeah, I think that definitely impacted my choice.
So when you say data collection, do you mean that you interviewed people or was so? Okay. So since you interviewed people, what was like the most harrowing thing that you heard and what was like the most surprising thing that you heard by your, of course, the
Yeah.
people that you interviewed?
I think there were many harrowing things. Like, of course, I have my own experiences of facing racism and facing like transphobia and all those sort of things. But yeah, I think the most harrowing part was definitely the sexual aspect of it, the sort of sexual violence that a lot of people faced. Uh, uh, and the racism aspect of it, definitely. It really, got to me. Like, when I was collecting data, I had to take some time off and, process everything that was, going on as well. Yeah, I think it was definitely the sexual violence aspect of it, definitely. Also, the transphobia aspect of it, wow, we could connect on many levels. Like, I and my participants could connect on many levels. But yeah, I think definitely the racism aspect of it and the sexual violence aspect of it. Like, especially, in sort of very vulnerable environments like detention centers and those sort of things. Yeah.
So could you share some stories if you will be allowed to without like breaching their confidentiality or anything?
Oh yeah, definitely. I won't take names.
Of course, of
Yeah, I won't
course.
take names, but yeah, I think so. I was talking to a trans woman who's from like the western part of Asia, and she was detained on arrival in New Zealand, and she was sharing experiences of transphobia and sexual violence, and like how she was placed in like a male prison based on her identification documents from her home country. So she was placed in a male prison where, she faced a lot of sexual harassment, a lot of transphobia from not just, other people who were detained. She was literally placed in a prison for like 5 days, like not even like a refugee sort of camp or, anything as such, or, a refugee housing. She was literally detained in a prison for like 5 days. And yeah, she shared experiences of men constantly, ridiculing her, men constantly, sort of and negating her identity, and all that stuff. Yeah, and at the end, she was like I face so many things that like I have an anxiety towards men right now, which I'm taking therapy for. I think the term is called agoraphobia. Yeah, that's the term she used. So I have agoraphobia, and that's why I'm taking therapy right now. I have an anxiety towards men. So yeah, I think this was definitely one of the many harrowing experiences that I had. But yeah, I think sort of sexual violence aspect of it definitely isn't always talked about. So I think, and that's where I also contribute in the literature as well, because trans refugee and asylum studies is an emerging field. A lot has been talked about the legal process, like the asylum adjudication process, how asylum is determined, how refugee status is determined, but not a lot has been talked about experiences beyond that. So, for example, housing or like healthcare or like employment. What has been talked about that? So I wanted to sort of look into that. Also, I wanted to look into the sort of support that is available to them. So in terms of like support from the government organizations, welfare benefits and those sort of things. Then support from non-governmental organizations or NGOs. Also support from the civil society as well. So yeah, my research mainly involved like three aspects. One is institutions. It mainly focused around the sort of asylum process, but also around gender confirmed identification, because that is one of the primary things that affects most trans people actually, and that actually sort of uh, exposes them to further sexual and emotional, mental, physical violence as well, like murders in some instances. Also integrated into the sort of institutions like employment, like housing, and how that sort of works for trans asylum seekers and refugees, and then also the sort of support that is available to.
So you talked about this woman who was from East of Asia and she went to New Zealand and she had to face what she had to face. How do you kind of build a trust with these people? Because all these conversations are not conversation that happens immediately. So you have to talk to them a lot or you have to build some bond and build some trust. So what was the most surprising thing about these conversations that you have? Like what was it that made you feel how was it like?
Yeah, I think my participants were really like open to talking about things, and they're always available on like WhatsApp or email or Facebook. So whenever I had a question or a doubt, or like, because I also wanted it to be very grounded in their experiences without like me sort of like data analysis. Like a lot of what participants speak can get lost in your own sort of interpretation. So I was constantly engaging with them and sort of trying to understand whether I'm interpreting their sort of experiences correctly, or like, I mean, correct wouldn't be the right term to use it, but appropriately rather. Yeah. Apart from that, yeah, I think I mainly went in through an NGO, and that is the only NGO that advocates for rainbow asylum seekers, or queer asylum seekers and trans asylum seekers as well. So I mean, that was I was already sort of vetted by the organization before even I got access to the participants. So I had like a full 1 hour interview, more than 1 hour interview with the organization itself, where they asked me about my why I wanted to do this research, and like where I come from, what is my positionality in this research, how would I treat participants, how would I treat the data, all those sort of things. So I think I was already, like vetted by the organization in some ways. That gave me
Right.
access to and also I think like my positionality as a gender diverse researcher from the global south really helped me in gaining access to participants as well.
So that is interesting that you went via an NGO, right? So I think that made the process of trust a little bit more easier because you were vouched by the NGO themselves. So could you share some more experiences of the people that you interviewed? You talked about this is I think what is very interesting about it is that we talk about asylum seekers all the time, right? India also talks about the Rohingya asylum seekers all the time, but this trans asylum seekers is something that nobody really talks about. And what I know of it is that a lot of people also face a lot of trauma from the home country, and it doesn't become any better in, say, the country that they land in, like you already discussed.
Yeah.
So, could you like share more experiences, more stories from
Yeah.
your data?
Yeah, I think previous research has definitely shown that a lot of queer and trans asylum seekers perceive the environments in their host countries to be much more hostile than in their home countries. Like, I think in the previous research, a lot of people have talked about, like, like back in my home country, I was only facing transphobia or queerphobia, but in my host country, I'm facing racism, queerphobia, xenophobia, and sort of intersection of all of these. I think in my research, I think my participants were really sort of course, I mean, I didn't interview a lot of people to be able to come to a conclusion. Like my participants were very limited because numbers, and it's
Of
very hard,
course.
recruit participants, who have a lot of trauma, and like also I couldn't interview people who are going through the asylum process, because that might
Confidential.
affect their asylum claim adversely. So yeah, I think some of my participants were like really happy, and like I remember one of my participants was talking about, oh, I'm a proud New Zealander now, I'm a proud Kiwi now, I've got my passport last year. While others were talking about, like, in my home country, it was so good. Like, everyone used to know me. I used to go out on the street, and, I used to go out to a shop, and, used to buy things. Here, I just roam around, and, I would go to a, like coffee shop, and, no one would know me. Even if I go there, like, daily, no one would really care, so that sort of, like, sort of, what do you call it? Like, the cultural sort of difference in many ways. Yeah, I think it was very diverse, and I think my research was especially more diverse because two of my participants sought asylum when they were minors, so below 18. So one person was 15 and another person was 16. Yeah, so that they had very different perspectives from people who like were like in probably in their late 20s or early 30s when they claimed asylum. So yeah, I think it was diverse in that sense. Yeah, I think in terms of experiences, I think uh one of my participants who was a trans man from Asia, Eastern Asia, like how he faced sort of like being sexualized as an East Asian, like uh, female and then trans man, like how he used to be sexualized and still continues to be sexualized. So yeah, I think there are so many different aspects because it's not like a uniform, homogeneous.
Watertight compartment.
My research had people from all sorts of different places, all sorts of different races. So everyone's sort of perception and everyone's experiences were very different, and I think that made it a bit harder to bring everything into paper. But yeah, I managed to do it somehow.
So, for somebody who doesn't know much about asylum can only be sought when there's some sort of threat to one's life in the home country, right? So, how does asylum work? Like, how does one claim asylum, and how is it different from for a queer person, especially in New Zealand or any country like that?
Yeah, I think the whole asylum process itself is very harrowing. Firstly, because you have to firstly establish that you are at a risk in your home country, so you need to have a lot of documentation to prove that, which might not be always possible if you are like escaping your country. So some people might get some time, and they like them leaving the country might be very planned. So they have taken some time to think, and they've taken some time to understand. Okay, like I want to leave the country. This is where I want to go. So they might have planned. For some other people, it might be very drastic. Like like someone is killed in their neighborhood, and within the night they have to leave the place and the country. Uh, so I think it's not all. I mean, some people even do not have the time to collect their documents or take the passports and all that sort of things. Firstly, it is very harrowing for everyone. Like even if you're coming planned, like you're coming to a new country where like you don't have any form of support, and then you are introduced into a system where like the support is very minimal. Yeah, because New Zealand and most Western nations have this perception that they want active ethnic citizens, like who would contribute to their economy without expecting much in return. And asylum seekers definitely do not fall into that, right? They need a lot of support and a lot of uh, in their host country to be able to do something. Be able to even like, so for example in New Zealand for instance, especially for employment, there is often this clause that is hard, that is New Zealand work experience. So like this is sort of like privileging of some form of experience, saying, oh, like local experience is much more valuable than experience elsewhere, especially experience gained in the global south. Yeah, so and is treated as like valuable work experience in New Zealand. For this is not just a thing for asylum seekers but also for many migrants as well. How do you gain New Zealand work experience if no one is employed?
It's true.
So the only way left for you to gain experience is through volunteering with like Red Cross, other sort of NGOs. But then New Zealand is an expensive country. It's not like you can survive on 10 rupees per day, 20 rupees per day, right? It's an expensive country. So like how long can you survive on volunteering? So people need a lot of support. Like like people need support with English. People need support with like work experience there. So, and of course it's definitely not uniform for everyone, but for majority, of course, this is the case. There might be people who are very highly qualified and coming to the country, and their like escape was very planned and everything. But still, I think there are some barriers that are faced by everyone, especially the lack of local work experience. Another one is like uh, very little welfare benefits available. Like most asylum seekers, when they arrive in their host country, probably wouldn't even have like like a lot of things on their back. They might have like a small backpack or something like that. Like it's not like like the like they're
They get to pack a suitcase and curate it. Yeah.
like the typical migrant sort of narrative that oh, you're typically packing everything in a suitcase and leaving. For asylum seekers, that's not often the case. They're not they didn't even get, probably they didn't even get the time to pack everything in a suitcase, or probably they sold everything to be able to gather some money to escape. So yeah, I think experiences differ for everyone. It's not a uniform experience definitely, but for specifically for queer and trans people, I think the primary thing that becomes a barrier is the gender and sexuality. I'll mainly talk about trans asylum seekers because that's where my research looks at. But this would also be applicable to some queer asylum seekers as well, broader queer asylum seekers as well. Yeah, I think the first thing that they encountered is, so in New Zealand, even in this, of course, there's no, of course, we have the Refugee Convention and we have so many UN documents, but then again, the asylum system is primarily determined by the country's legal system and not UNHCR. So every country's asylum system differs. So for example, in the UK, there have been cases of people having to prove their sexuality. Like, oh, you are gay, so prove that you are gay, right? Prove that you are gay, prove that So there are a lot of biases involved. So in the UK, there have been cases like people recording themselves having sex with like men recording themselves having sex with other men, and showing it as an evidence in court that oh, I'm gay and I have I had sex with men. So in New Zealand, what I found is, like it is generally well accepted within the legal system that, trans people are escaping. But the one thing that becomes a barrier is the requirement for, like gender affirming care, because that might not always be treated as, like something necessarily important, because New Zealand also has this sort of, uh, previously it was $41,000. Now it's $82,000 limit on like the amount of healthcare that you can, amount spent on healthcare, especially on public healthcare, that you can utilize in 5 years. And $82,000 for 5 years is nothing, especially when it comes to, gender affirming care, or, any sort of, like life-threatening conditions, be it, like even cancer, for instance, or, like heart ailments, for instance. Like $82,000 in New Zealand is nothing for, like healthcare for 5 years, right? So a lot of people, face barriers within that system. So a lot of people are actually forced to claim asylum. It's not like, everyone is arriving at the border and claiming asylum, as is the very popular image, like what
Yes.
that, like people are, crossing the Mediterranean Ocean, people are, arriving in dinghies and, all that stuff. In New Zealand, it's very different, because in New Zealand, it's very isolated, and it's almost impossible to, like be in New Zealand. The nearest landmass to New Zealand is Australia, and that is still 2,500 kilometers nearly. So yeah. So basically, no one has, reached New Zealand by boat or anything ever. So the problem in New Zealand is very much home. So what happens in New Zealand is, like, especially if you're applying for visas, and, if the immigration notices that, like, your name is this, but you are using a different pronoun. So people are surveilled based on that. And the assumption is that, if you're trans, you would need healthcare. Not every trans person, or not every, gender diverse person would, like, look for healthcare, right? Not everyone would want to transition medically. But the assumption is that, like, oh, you are coming here to take benefits of the healthcare system. And that acts as a barrier for many people. And then many people are forced to claim asylum. So it's not like, like people are arriving there to claim asylum. Well, that is, of course, true for certain people. Certain people definitely come to New Zealand to claim asylum. But that is not true for a lot of people who are claiming asylum in New Zealand. It's mainly a homegrown problem where, there are uh, there, there are so many, bureaucratic criteria to get a visa that, most people actually fail the test. Then another thing becomes this character certificate. So, for example, people who are coming, like in New Zealand, many of them would have like forged passports, right? Because they couldn't escape with their passports or documents or anything from their home countries. So a lot of people would come with on their forged passports. When they claim asylum, during the asylum adjudication process, the healthcare or the character, certificate doesn't become an issue. Your case is primarily adjudicated based on your circumstances in your home country. And that is also very complex as well. They take into account a lot of things. So, for example, a person who's claiming asylum from, say, Sudan, where, like the international sort of, where the conflict is very well documented internationally, right? It is much easier to claim asylum than for someone, say, coming from India, where, like especially for trans people. I mean, there are laws, right? There's Trans Act. There was Nalsa judgment. I mean, there still is, but yeah. But the thing is, these laws are not always effective, right, in protecting trans people. These laws are not. But then, when you're claiming asylum in New Zealand, they'll be like, oh, laws exist in your country. So, like it's safe for trans people. So, like we probably won't grant you asylum or grant you refugee status, right? So yeah, I think there are this, inter-country barriers, and then there are also like intra-country barriers. So, for example, the example of Malaysia. So in Malaysia, Sharia law applies to Muslims, but not to, Chinese or Indians in Malaysia. So for Muslim trans people escaping Malaysia, it would be much easier to claim asylum than for, like Indian or Chinese people escaping Malaysia, because there's a legal gap in Malaysia, right? Like Sharia law very well criminalizes being gender diverse and being trans, but, the other sort of laws that are applicable to other sort of ethnicities or races in Malaysia, they don't talk a lot about, like being gender diverse. But they're still, like there have been many such instances where, like trans people in Malaysia have faced harassment from the police, from government officials, faced, threats for violence, even violence. But yeah, like so yeah, I mean, it is very complicated. The asylum system itself is very complicated, and then of course the time that it takes. So before COVID, it used to take like around 3 to 6 months. Now it's taking over 2 years. So for 2 years, you are basically suspended between legal statuses. I mean, you are a legal resident, of course, but yeah, but yeah, many sort of benefits that are available.
To a regular citizen, right?
Yeah, even for permanent residents, right? You are not eligible for a lot of benefits that are available, firstly. Secondly, you are also not eligible to, like study or anything. You have to apply for work visa. So in many countries, your asylum claim also grants you a work visa, but in New Zealand, you have to apply it separately from your own pocket. So you have to pay money for it, which is expensive. And that only lasts for three to 6 months. So you have to keep renewing it. And that also acts as a barrier in employment because employers are very used to seeing long term visas. So they're like, oh, you have got a visa for 3 months. It's sort of expectation that employers have is okay, like this person has a visa for 3 months. So like then we have to sponsor this person, which is gonna cost us money. So like a lot of like asylum seekers find work in like very seasonal sort of part-time jobs, seasonal employment, like Christmas jobs or Easter jobs or these sort of things, which of course isn't long-term employment and not stable as well. So yeah, I think there are so many barriers that exist for trans asylum seekers, even asylum seekers in general, and for trans asylum seekers this is multiplied because the gender identity also acts as a barrier. Because in New Zealand, the primary issue that, of course, there's issues with healthcare and stuff as well, but the primary issue is gender concordant documents. So basically, having a document that reflects your gender identity and your preferred name. So New Zealand is worldwide known as heaven for trans people, where according to the recent 2021 Birth, Death, Marriages Registration Act, Birth, Death, Marriages and Relationships Registration Act, trans people can, have their preferred name and gender identity on their birth certificate without any sort of medical intervention or anything. So basically, you just need to declare that you are trans, and you can have it reflected in your identity documents. Even birth certificate for that instance. So that doesn't apply to migrants because migrants do not have birth certificates from New Zealand. But previously there was another system where you would have to. Sorry, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. I can listen.
Okay. Yeah. So previously there was a system where like you could still change you could change your gender and preferred name. I mean that wasn't until you are a permanent resident, but that was there where you could change your gender and preferred name on, say, driver's license, passport, like without changing your birth certificate basically. So that process is now gone. For trans asylum seekers, until last year, the Department of Internal Affairs was issuing certificate of identity documents. So basically every asylum seeker, according to the international convention, is entitled to a certificate of identity and a refugee travel document if the certificate of identity when they haven't got their refugee status, and then refugee travel documents when they have secured their refugee status, right? So until last year, there was a sort of workaround that existed where like you could get a certificate of identity in your preferred gender. Name change wasn't possible, but gender change was. Even though a lot of my participants claim that certificate of identity was anyway useless because it wasn't recognized at most places. So it was only recognized by the Department of Internal Affairs and not anyone else. So, for example, if you are going to buy, say, age-restricted items, say like energy drinks, for instance, or cigarettes, or even alcohol, for that instance, you have to show your ID. Certificate of identity doesn't help. So they are often asked to show their passport or birth certificate. Passport in their case because they don't have a New Zealand birth certificate. Yeah, and people above 18 are still entitled to a 18 plus card. That can be self-declared. Like you can self-declare your name and identity. That mainly acts as a proof of age and not a proof of identity or citizenship. But for people who are minors, that isn't the option. And also last year the DIA issued the circular that they wouldn't accept gender changes on certificate of identity anymore. So all the sort of documents that would be issued by DIA and the Immigration New Zealand would reflect the name and gender that is on their passport. So when you don't have a gender concordant identification document, a document that reflects your gender identity and preferred name, you are prone to it. Like people are walking into get job, get employment. People are walking into interviews and then they show their ID and then the ID says something completely different than their presentation, right? Then they're more prone to violence, more prone to abuse, more prone to exploitation, especially in housing, healthcare, and employment situations. Yeah.
So the whole system is against them. I just wanted to congratulate on your research first because it's amazing. I really liked listening to you as like you could go on forever.
Thank
Also because for somebody like me, I'm working on rape narratives for my PhD, and I still wouldn't get to know much about, say, the trans or the queer issue, especially when it comes to asylum, right? That is, and your research is amazing. I could tell it the way that you talk. You're so thorough. It's really amazing that you were able to talk about it so well.
you.
I really liked it. So, do you have any other like anecdotes or say stories from from the people that you interviewed? Anything? So, when you say something like that, well, now how do you? So, you talked about the UK case, right, where somebody has to prove that they are of certain sexuality, correct? How does it affect somebody? So, for example, how do you prove? So, when somebody says that, prove to me that you're trans or prove to me that you're queer, how is one supposed to do it? And there's of course cases of exploitation in it's pretty obvious. So do you know of any stories of experiences of people who have been through it? And also I had another question. So hypothetically, as a queer person, you're going to New Zealand on asylum seeking basis, and then you get rejected. It happens so often, right? That then what happens?
Yeah. So in my research, I was only able to look at like legal cases that were available, like publicly, and actually a lot of them were, like cases of refusal. But of course, I couldn't interview people who were refused because they were likely not in the country at that point. Because once your case is refused, you have the option for, like a review. So you can approach the asylum process is like firstly your case is assessed by someone called refugee and protection officer from the refugee status branch of Immigration New Zealand, which of course sits within the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment,
That
MBIE.
will also take money, right? I'm pretty sure that.
The claiming asylum doesn't take money.
Okay.
Applying for work visa does. Without the work visa, you are not eligible to work. So claiming asylum doesn't take money. You are eligible to you are eligible to lawyers under legal aid. So like claiming asylum doesn't take money. But I think a lot of other things that are associated with claiming asylum does take money. So yeah. Sorry, what was your question? I sort of.
So there were two questions. What happens to people when their refugee status gets declined? So do you know of any stories or even so the first person that you talked about was this person who had to stay in a male prison even though they identified as a woman. So do you know of any other people like that and what was the experiences like?
Yeah. Firstly, about the cases of refusal, like as I mentioned, like it was kind of impossible to talk to
Of
people who
course.
were refused because they were not likely in the country at that point. Yeah. So just talking about the asylum process. So I think talking about that will give you some sense of how it works. So firstly, your case is decided by the RPO, the Refugee and Protection Officer. So when you apply for asylum, you get an interview. So you work with your lawyer to, like sort of make your case, and then you get an interview where like where refugee and protection officer is going to interview you, and basically details about your case, details about your circumstances in home country, and like all that sort of things. That takes typically a full day to 1.5 days. Yeah, and then like they are sent the interview report along with observations from the refugee protection officer. Like there can be a lot of visual biases also like built into it as
Of
well.
course.
Like, do you look trans, right?
Yes, the performance of
Yeah, the
the.
performance aspect of it. But in New Zealand, generally, like there's not a strict requirement. Like for example, in the US. In the US, like trans people who are claiming asylum have often been asked to prove what sort of medical procedures did you go through. Like like so the expectation is that okay, like you have to go through medical transitioning to be able to claim your asylum as a trans person. In New Zealand, that is typically not the case, and that is uh,
I have a question. So, when you say that you have to prove that you are a trans in the US, what happens to people who are not able to prove it? Because not everybody goes through a medical transition, right?
in the US case, it's very in the US. So the trans asylum sort of legislation sort of evolved very differently from other places. So in the US, like that, I mean, the first case that one can think about is Hernandez Montiel in 2000. Yeah, and in that case, the judge sort of adjudicated that the person is, even though, like she was a trans woman, the judge adjudicated that she is a gay male with female sexual identity. I don't know what that means, but yeah, that was a legal term that was used, and that was up until 2015 when Avenando Hernandez happened. So basically, this case was of a trans person who was escaping from Mexico, and at that point, Mexico had same-sex marriage. In 2014, Mexico, 2015, Mexico legislated for same-sex marriage. So basically, when she claimed asylum in the US, the judge was like, "Oh, you are a gay male with a female sexual identity, so you're a gay man, basically, right?" And Mexico has even introduced same-sex marriage, so there is no sort of persecution per se, right? And then that sort of made a case about differentiating trans people from gay men with sort of female sexual identity, or like that sort of legal terminology. And that's when a separate sort of adjudication process for trans asylum seekers was established, specifically in terms of proving medically. There are so many documented cases of trans people like seeking asylum in the US, even going to this sort of very unofficial, very sort of like what we in India call quack doctors, right? Very unofficial, very informal, sort of doctors to, take hormones to, like for surgery and, these sort of things, which of course is very harmful, very, dangerous to their health. But yeah, that we have seen in the US a lot. In New Zealand, that is typically not the case. In New Zealand, people are generally able to access healthcare, although there are biases
Of
built in the
course.
system, because like especially when you start to change, for instance, like you're taking hormones, and your appearance starts to change, then a lot of people have faced discrimination. Like you are going to see your doctor, and the receptionist is like, "Oh, is this really you? Like you don't look like this. Is this really you?" Right?
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, in the US, that is typically the case, like where you have to prove that you are. So coming back to the New Zealand case, so basically once you are refused by the refugee protection officer, you can appeal at the Immigration and Protection Tribunal, and then the appeal is heard by a judge and everything. And then, if that is approved, then your refugee status is granted. If that is not, then you can appeal further. So you can appeal to Immigration Protection Tribunal. Sorry, you can appeal to the High Court, especially if it's a case of deportation and not asylum seeking per se. Yeah, people can go up to the High Court and seek redressal. But
But where do these people live in the middle of this? So from what I know about asylum seeking is that they put you in these government assigned places, right? Or they're sponsored by the government, or they put you with locals, and the local gets money for taking care of you, right? So how do they divide you? So do they do it on the basis of gender, or do they randomly assort you to places? How does it happen?
that is typically the thing for people who are arriving in New Zealand and claiming asylum. So in New Zealand, in Auckland, there is a refugee resettlement center.
Okay.
That's called Mangere Refugee Resettlement Center. That place is typically built for quota refugees who come into the country through like UNHCR quota programs. New Zealand takes in like around 1,500 quota refugees per year. So that is where quota refugees stay for like a week, or like up to a month, and get acquainted with the country, take some basic English lessons, and those sort of things, and then like they are resettled within the communities. So for asylum seekers, they are also housed within the system, within the Mangere Refugee Resettlement Center. But a lot of like people have talked about how it's more of a detention and not a sort of resettlement center, because you can't go out of the center, like except for like fixed hours, like you can only go out for like 3 hours a day, uh 3 or 4 hours a day, and then you are typically placed in like the sort of sex based sort of
Of
segregation.
course, yeah, that is what I meant. Yes.
Yeah. So trans women would be placed in, male cells, trans men would be placed in female cells, these sort of things definitely happen. But apart from that, for a lot of people who are claiming asylum, they are not entitled to any accommodation at all. So I had two participants who were homeless for, for periods of time when their asylum status, like when their asylum case was being heard. I had two participants who were homeless, like for various amounts of period. Like one participant talked about, like how he was going to night shelters, because it was in the middle of winter and it was really cold, like sometimes dropping to like 0 degrees, right? So it was middle of the winters and very cold. So, like at that time, there are night shelters in places for homeless people. But for the most time, he was living in McDonald's. Like since morning till like late in the night, he used to live in McDonald's, and then he used to go to this night shelter first to sleep, and then come back to McDonald's again.
So do they experience any sort of violence in while transitioning to these places, or are these places safe, so as to say?
I think,
Because we cannot imagine doing that. Forget queer people. We as men, like we as female or biologically male, we cannot even imagine going to shelters or anything, especially in India, without being inappropriately touched or any of those things. So let alone a person who. So
yeah.
how does it happen?
Yeah, I think one person talked about night shelters, and another person was couch surfing at their friends' places. Yeah, uh, uh, so the person who talked about the night shelters, they didn't talk about abuse, but they did talk about being sexualized, cause uh, cause they were a transplant from East Asia. It was transplant from East Asia, right? Yeah, like especially like there's a certain sort of racism and misogyny and sort of sexualization of East Asian females, East Asian women, like that is also visible in the mainland part of India towards northeastern women.
Of course.
Yeah, so there's certain sort of like sexualization. So like he did definitely talk about being sexualized. And he also talked about, oh, like now I get I get these men texting me that, oh, you are very attractive as a female, but now as a man you are much more attractive, do you want to have sex? So
That's also harassment of some sort, if
that is
not,
very much harassment, and like they experience it as a harassment, definitely.
of course.
So that is very much a harassment. Yeah.
So I love talking about your research. Now I like to go to your personal experiences, especially. So you've lived in, I'm assuming, two, three countries or even more. So we have talked about India, USA, and New Zealand. So how was your experience like, especially growing up? So when we were talking on the phone, you said that you'd like to talk about the laws, you'd like to talk about the experiences of your friends. So
Yeah, I think my experience growing up was good but not great. Yeah, especially as a gender diverse person, as a Koti person growing up, like in like small towns in India, it's not a very like positive experience.
where did you grow up?
I grew up in a town called Ranaghat, which is like 70 kilometers away from Kolkata.
Okay.
Yeah. So and I'm talking about like around 15 years back, right? At the time, there was no queer, trans, gender diverse, whatever visibility at all. Like, now the visibility is growing, but 10, 15 years back, there was not much visibility at all, right? So, yeah, experiences were pretty much, I mean, firstly, I didn't have the words to describe it anyway because I didn't know the lingo. Secondly, yeah, definitely, my experience was filled with sexual violence. Yeah, I think when I was like 7, 8 years old, sexual violence started. At that time, it was like fun. It was supposed to be funny. It was supposed to be like, like, oh, this is just a little game that we are playing.
This was by adults or people your age?
Yeah, by someone who's probably 30 years older than me.
Okay. So this was like a family member, or
This
was it somebody?
this person used to work as a driver. Yeah, so that's when it started. When I was like 7 or 8, like he used to touch me inappropriately, and he used to be like, "Oh, this is a small game. You shouldn't play this in front of your parents, but this is a small game that we're playing, right?" So that's how it started, and then once I like got into teenage and all that stuff, like, I think I faced a lot of sexual harassment even in like running trains and all that stuff. Like people just casually sliding their hands into my pants or those sort of things, which was very uncomfortable to begin with. Yeah. Uh, apart from that, I think since you also talked about migration, and I think I definitely want to talk about migration as well. So I lived in the UK before moving to New Zealand. That's where I did my bachelor's and master's.
You've had quite a journey. Congratulations on that.
Thank
Very proud of you for that. Amazing.
you. Thank
Now
you.
that you've done a research in New Zealand, you have been to all the places, and you started from a small town as you describe it. Many congratulations on
Thank
that.
you.
So happy for you. Yeah. So
Yeah, so I think when I was in the UK, I experienced rape from an Indian man uh, who was like I was what 19 back then. Very much into adolescence. He was like double my age. He was like 37, 38 around that time. I experienced rape and I was drunk. In spite of resisting, I couldn't resist, and that was very non-consensual, and that was even without any protection. Yeah, and I think the thing about migration that like still is stuck with me till date is I was in the UK. right? I could have easily reported him to authorities. I mean, the laws around sexual harassment are much more stronger in the UK than in India, right? Although gaps persist, definitely, but it's strong to some extent, right? I could have easily reported. But yeah, like there was so much involvement of, okay, like, even if I report, this is not something that I would be able to hide from people. This is not something like, okay, even if I report this person, I have to, go to police station, I have to go to courts and, all those sort of things, right? And this is not something that I can hide from people. Like, not from my parents, definitely. And the time when this happened, I was due to come back to India for summer, like in another month. So I was like, okay, like, like if this happens, I won't be able to leave the country. I won't be, I have to tell my parents something. Or I have to tell, my family something. Why am I not able to come back? Or, what has happened? And people would know any, right? So that fear sort of prevented me from reporting. So I think when I think about it now, I sort of analyze it in the way that we can leave our home countries, we can leave our, homes, we can leave our places, but, we are still stuck by sort of,
Social conditioning.
yeah, the social, not just the social conditioning, but also the fear of, like, okay, what would happen if, like, if my parents back home get to, like, how would I describe it? How would I, talk about things, right? And this was and especially for me, this was at a point when I wasn't, like, even properly out to my parents. Like, I didn't, when my parents didn't know a lot about me, right? This was at that time. So, like even talking about this experience was essentially mean coming. And that was a conversation that, I was trying to avoid at that time, right?
Did you tell your friends about it? Like, did you tell anybody about it?
Actually, not even, in the locality. In the UK, I did have, like, friends, like, a lot of friends, but I didn't even talk about it, like, until much, much, much later. Like, probably I started talking about it after like 1.5 years of that incident.
So when it happened, I'm assuming you were at a club or some place, or were you at a house?
Yeah, I was at his house. So he invited me for, like, a meetup. He was like, okay, come to my place. We'll just drink and have a casual conversation. That was the promise that I went with, right? I wasn't looking to engage with him, sexually. I wasn't looking to engage with him in any way apart from, conversation. So, okay, like, I went and he was like, okay, let's talk and let's start drinking. I was like, okay, fine. So I started drinking, and then I don't know if it was because, like, he didn't definitely, like, open a sealed bottle in front of me, like,
Makes sense. It
yeah.
was an
So
already opened bottle, so you don't know if he
if it was spiked,
roofied it or something.
yeah, if it was spiked, I didn't,
Yeah.
I didn't know. Yeah, and like, I drank it, and, like, I don't know, I sort of felt like I am in my senses, but I don't have the energy to do anything. Yeah, I wasn't able to go back home. Like, I didn't even go there to stay for a night or anything. I was like, okay, like, I'll drink with you for 2 hours and then I'll come back home because I have work to do. Right? And then I wasn't able to come back, like, even in 4 hours. And he was like, oh, you can stay here for the night. I was like, okay, that is very kind of you and all that. But then, like, but he had some other motives.
Of course.
He had some other motives. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and then of course there are definitely experiences here and there of, like people trying to be sexual, people trying to, because I think, especially queer, transgender, diverse people are often seen as very easy targets for men. Yeah, like I have definitely had instances of, people threatening me to, like, beat me up in running trains and, all that stuff. Yeah, and I've been told on my face that, like, something around, oh, these people are, oh, this person is alone. This kind of person is alone, and, look at what they're trying to do. If they were in a gang, then, they would have harassed us, sort of thing.
Yes.
And this was in retaliation to, like, threats of beating me up. And I was basically standing up, and I was like, okay, like, I was standing up for myself, and I was like, okay, like, laws exist in this country, and, like, I was trying to scare them, kinda, because, like, most people don't know about laws, let alone trans act, although that's doesn't work. But yeah, I was trying to scare them because, like, I was scared. So I was
Of
trying to scare
course.
them. But yeah, like, they sort of told me on my face that, oh, this kind of person is alone. Look at what they're doing. Like, if they were in a group, by which they meant, of course, uh, uh, the sort of thing that they were trying to point was very clear. They were trying to point out, like hijras and, like, people begging on trains, hijras begging on trains. They were trying to, but yeah, the, but yeah, I mean, And there are definitely many more harrowing experiences in different parts of uh, India as well. Like I remember I used to live in Bangalore for a while.
You have been everywhere. This is what I like about you. You're so. I've been brought up in Delhi and I've spent all my life over here, right? But for you, it's like I've been to this place, I've been to that place, and it's amazing. It's amazing. Although some of the experiences might not have been amazing. So
Yeah,
sorry for that. But
that's all
I
right.
think wonderful. Yeah. So Bangalore.
Yeah, I was in Bangalore for a while, and it wasn't like like I was wearing a sari or anything in Bangalore, because of course I know that it's not safe. I was not in a safe environment. I knew that, but even if I'm wearing something very casual like a t-shirt and shorts, like people would still stare at me like like they would rape me through their eyes. Like I would go past them, but they would keep staring at me like they have I don't know what they've seen. Yeah, and these sort of experiences have been so common. Like like in different parts of India and elsewhere as well, like catcalling and like threatening and these sort of things. Yeah, even with uh, even in Delhi, I had this sort of experience like around 5 6 years back. Like I was at Delhi airport. I had a transfer. I had a layover rather. I had a layover for like 5 hours. Yeah, and I was at Delhi airport. People were staring at me like they have I don't know what they have seen. And it wasn't like it wasn't again like it wasn't like I was wearing makeup and I was wearing sari, or I was wearing skirt or something. It was literally just me in a t-shirt and shorts, a very common dress for like most people who are assigned male at birth, at least in this country, right? Very common. So yeah, I think there have been so many experiences of like threatening, but also like this sort of indirect sort of stares and indirect sort of violence in many ways, like symbolic violence in
Especially
many
when
ways.
you feel that their gaze on your body lingering, right? Like
Yes,
you don't have to look at them to know that they're looking at you.
yes, yes, yep.
So how does that change your perception to places, right? So how, like, for example, for somebody who was, say, assaulted at a very young age, right? How did it change your perception to people? I mean, I would assume I have talked to other survivors who at a very young age were touched. So that altered their brain chemistry to the kind of touch that they would. Like for me, example, I don't like experiencing touch of any sort, right? It just triggers me to no extent, and I cannot even explain it to somebody. So how was that post experience for you, like especially after the UK thing that happened?
I don't think I like being touched as well. I don't like being touched. Like, I like being touched only by people I approve, and that is in general very close people, not even my friends. That would in general be my mom or my partner, not anyone else. Like I wouldn't generally approve anyone touching me in any sort of way. Like, okay, like, I can give you occasional hugs. I can, console you and all that sort of thing. I don't like being touched at all apart from that. Like, yeah, yeah, I don't like being touched in any way. It's not just, like any sort of sexual way, but I don't like being touched in any way.
Yeah, I can totally relate to
Yeah,
that. It just triggers. I don't know how to explaine it, but just like my brain goes numb in that moment and it just my eyes there's like a blackness in front of me and I'm like either remove your hand or either something will happen. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, my brain freezes as well. And apart from that, yeah, I just don't know how to react to that. Like, yeah, I think I still haven't found a middle ground to that. Like, I think there are only two ends to it. One end is, okay, like, I'm becoming actively, aggressive towards the person, or, I'm becoming so numb that, I can't speak anything. So I haven't found a middle ground to it. Like, how to sort of navigate that
Navigate through that.
without being actively aggressive, or, like very passively, So yeah, yeah, definitely. I don't like being touched at all, like by anyone. Like if you want to speak to me, let's speak from a distance.
Yes, I totally understand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you want to speak to me, speak from a distance. Don't come near me. Like, I think especially with men. Like lately, I've been realizing that like I have a fear of like men I don't know specifically. Yeah, lately I've been realizing that I'm not in general very comfortable around men, especially cisgender heterosexual men. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have anxiety issues in general, but yeah, I think with men, I experience different kind of anxiety altogether. It's like people try to violate body boundaries all the time.
Yes.
Like,
And now digital boundaries as well, now that we
yes,
have internet.
Oh my gosh, yes, yes. Digital boundaries, yes, definitely. Like, the moment you open something like WhatsApp or something like, someone would be, and I don't know, like sort of this physical thing, thing has kind of come into the digital sphere as well. So I have definitely experienced things like someone texting me on a dating app and saying, oh, like, I saw you on the street, like, you were walking like this, like, your ass was so good that I got horny. And I was like, I don't like being stared on the streets like this, firstly, like, and even if that happened to you, why do you need to tell me this? Like, just keep it to
Why
yourself.
you to be so expressive about this? Like,
Exactly. Firstly, I don't like being stared on the streets, like, let alone, like whatever you're saying. Secondly, like, why do you
I
even need to
don't
tell
know.
me?
And where does this audacity to express so freely comes from? I think
Exactly.
especially for women, even if you put women aside, especially for queer bodies and people, I think this expression becomes much easier because there's no, I would say, there's no thrashback. So they feel as if they do this, they might as easily get away with it because who's there to stop them? Like, what is the
Yes.
repercussions of it? Do you think that? Like, what is your like?
Definitely, definitely. I think I've definitely heard many different versions of women are not very accessible, but queer people are accessible.
Yes.
Like a few years back, I met someone who explicitly told me that, oh, like, yeah, like you can't go out with women, like, and I'm quoting him. He was literally like, oh, you can't go out with women because women have so many demands, but look at queer people, look at trans people, they have no demands. Like, for women, you have to treat them for lunch and all that stuff. Look, queer people have no demands. So, and I'm like, where does this audacity even come from? like like how can you treat someone, a person, like, a person with such uh like derogatory words, derogatory terms, such, like, how can you see them as objects?
So I was watching Adolescence and the whole conversations around accessing bodies came to place. And I read this somewhere that somebody said that these people feel that they have access to our bodies, right? Like they have the right to our bodies. And it is why this audacity is where does it come from? So like since you have access to public spaces and if you've been to all these places, do you think that experiences of assault and violence are people different or they are the same? Like in terms of say you've how you access public spaces, does it change based on places or is it the same sort of experiences everywhere? Now that you've been to New Zealand, Bangalore, Delhi, Kolkata, everywhere. So do
uh
you think it changes or
it doesn't change, honestly. It doesn't change.
I mean, for somebody I've
The
been taught,
nature
like I've
changes. The
yeah, I've
nature
also
definitely
been
changes.
taught that the freedom increases with places. Do you think that happens? Or is it the same? Is it the same sort of experiences everywhere?
I think the nature changes, definitely. The nature of it definitely changes because, yeah, for example, if I'm in New Zealand or the UK, like, like I'm not just being seen as a queer body, but also a racialized body.
Yes.
So the nature definitely changes. Yeah, but apart from that, especially if I talk about India, yeah, I think it does change to some extent in different places. It does. But yeah, I think the core of it is still entitlement. Yeah, it's. I mean, probably their way of assault would change, the language would change, but the core of it is still the same. The core of it is no different. It's still the entitlement that oh, like these bodies are easily accessible to us, or these
These
bodies
are
are.
mine. Our bodies to exploit, touch, do whatever that they feel like.
Exactly. For them, it's like these bodies are easily accessible to us. That these bodies, like, can be, like quote unquote played with, in any way we want, sort of. Like
Without any repercussions.
without any repercussions. Yes, because there are no repercussions, and that's where the law comes in, right? The Trans Act 2019. It does talk about a lot of things, but it doesn't establish any procedures. So, for example, it does talk about, oh, like, trans people can't be kicked out of their homes. Trans people, can't be discriminated, and so many other things. And at the end, it talks about, oh, like, if trans people are violated, like physical violence or, any sort of violence, sexual violence specifically, then the perpetrator is entitled to not entitled, but the perpetrator can face a, prison sentence of minimum 6 months to 2 years. For women, it's 7 years to life. So basically, you are telling me that trans people themselves, like trans people are third class citizens who do not deserve the same protection as women, right? So trans. Firstly, that. Secondly, the IPC Section 377, which existed since 1860, and recently when homosexuality was decriminalized. So just the the thing around consensual sex was decriminalized, but it still had provisions for, like complaining, although that was, there were practical, barriers to it. But in terms of law, I'm saying you could still report someone for, like rape or sexual violence or sexual assault. Now that law is gone. And
Bharti Nyaya Sanhita,
that law
yes.
is gone. So basically, we don't have any laws. Like the Trans Act, it's there. But the thing is, who are we even supposed to report to? Are we supposed to go to police stations when police themselves are involved in like violence against trans people on a regular basis? There have been so many instances, like, for years and years around police violence against trans people and queer people. Are we supposed to go to the same place? So for example, in 2020 there was this case of, harassment against a feminine queer trans person near my hometown, and they went to the police station, and the police was like, "Oh, you are alive, right? You are alive, then you are good. Go home and sleep." So the police was literally like this. So how can we trust the police? And this is not just police, in a certain police station or a certain place or a certain city. This is police everywhere. This is police all around the country. Like I have been harassed on the streets of Bangalore by police officials.
Then who do you report it to? If the
Exactly.
police is doing it,
Exactly.
where do you go?
Exactly. Who do you report it to? Do you report it to the police? Once you go, you feel like, oh, I did a mistake coming here. I shouldn't have come here. I should have just dealt with it myself. Who do you report? Like even with the Trans Act, like the government has made some, very symbolic sort of progress in terms of, oh, we have the Trans Act now. Trans people are protected. We care about trans people so much. That is not reflected in any of the systems that are in place, right? So even if I'm sexually assaulted in a public place, I don't have any avenues to complain, or I don't have any avenues to, even report it to any place. So, for instance, I remember when, and let's talk about cyber threats as well, because I have received a lot of that.
Really?
Yeah, a
Do
lot
you
of.
complain?
I have tried.
But I don't think so. Those are of any help. Like you get a virtual FIR. I've also done a lot of those, but nothing really comes out of it. They want you to go to the police station, then to put in some. They want you to give some proof. Then how do you give proof of assault when it's chats, and then they don't think chats are viable enough as.
Yeah, I tried doing that back in 2020. Uh, yeah, so I reported it. So I took all the screenshots and everything and reported it to the cyber crime branch something. I emailed them with my phone number and everything. They called me the next day. They were like, and this was during peak COVID. This was during lockdown. And the police officer was telling me, you need to travel 70 kilometers to file an FIR. And this was at a time when there was no public transport, there was a lockdown. I'm like, how am I supposed to go 70 kilometers to Kolkata and report this? Like, there is no public transport available at the first place. Like, how do you expect me to come here? Come there and, go there and, like report things.
And so even if you are able to go to that distance, what is the guarantee that they're not going to call you back again and say that this is not enough?
Yeah, no, that comes way later. Firstly, what is the guarantee that they're going to take you seriously? Secondly, what is the guarantee that, they like they wouldn't assault you themselves? Thirdly, what is the guarantee that, you wouldn't be just told, oh, like, you're alive, right? This doesn't matter, go home. And I wasn't reporting something like, oh, like, someone just saying, like transphobic stuff. I was literally reporting something where, people were giving threats to kill me at that stage, rape me and kill me. And that didn't work. So, so yeah, like cyber violence definitely, it forms a big aspect of it, and especially for queer trans people, no matter what opinions you have, no matter, like what you say, it always boils down to, like your, like queerness or transness. It always boils down to that. Like I have tried engaging in so many conversations online. Like I used to do that a lot before, not anymore. Like, yeah, I don't find it useful at all. Yeah.
They don't want to listen to you. They want to just fight you, is so far what I've observed.
I mean, yeah, I mean, even with fighting, for instance, like, yeah, I think no matter what you talk about, until it boils down to, oh, like, like you look like a joker. You should continue being a joker instead of, talking about something. You look like a joker, or, like something like, like these are still like sensible, comments that I'm saying. These are still sensible, but some comments are like, "Tu jaise hijro ko ka kyun sunूं मैं? Tu jaise hijro ko to देश." Especially when it comes to, like sexual violence, be it, like, digital or physical, we don't have any avenues to report it at the first place. So, like most of us just deal with it ourselves. Like, we are sexually assaulted, we go to the police assaults us, police doesn't want to take our complaints. And then, like, even if we force the police to take complaints, then, that goes nowhere. Like many a time, the people who are making the complaints are themselves, like, arrested and being like, oh, like, you have stolen something, you have done this, and, all that stuff. These things are very common. Like before 2022, it used to be, oh, you are a sex worker. That's why you need to be arrested. Before 2018, it used to be, you are homo, you are queer, whatever. That's why you need to extort money from you, right? Then it was sex work. And now it has come down to more like, stealing, but, and all the sort of very petty crimes that, like, you can accuse someone of without any evidence at all. And then you can abuse the person. So
So you talked about this law, right? Now, of course, there's Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. They don't even recognize the rape of males, the rape of animals. It's only women and children, right? So we talked about the UK, right? You had to prove that you were gay, or the US, where you had to have had some medical transitioning to prove that you were transgender. How do you prove to be trans in a country like India?
this is a
Is there a provision
This
to
is a very
prove?
pertinent question, actually. Thank you so much for that question, because this is something that, like we have been talking about for so long. Yeah. When we look at Nalsa judgment, a Nalsa judgment allows for self-identification of gender. Nalsa judgment was, even though it has its own backdrops, but, it was very progressive of its time. Like, it had its own backdrops, specifically, like, focusing more on trans feminine identities than trans masculine identities, like, all that stuff. But it was progressive in its time, right? And then we have the Trans Act, right? So the Trans Act basically reverses a lot of things that the Nalsa judgment did. What the Trans Act does is it establishes, like, the earlier versions of the bill, like in 2016 and 2017, the bill said something like, you have to go to the district magistrate and prove that you are trans. And then we are like, how do we prove we are trans? Should we just lift our, sari or skirts or whatever, and, like, show that we are trans? How do we prove that we are trans, right? Then that was the,
Scrape.
yeah, then that was taken away, but it established a sort of procedure. So the transgender, there's the act, and there are the transgender person protection of rights rules, which sort of establishes a procedure to, like, to sort of, like, get a transgender identity, and again, it differs across states. So, for example, in West Bengal, you can't get you can't get identity documents saying you are male or female unless and until you have gone through surgery. So you can't get that, right? And that is the same across a lot of different states as well. When it comes to, so India has a separate provision for a T mark, right? A T mark, which they call third gender, which is again very offensive term. I call it transgender, much more useful. In legal terms, they call it third gender, but yeah, like transgender. But even for that, you need to get gender dysphoria, or what they call in India gender identity disorder certificates.
Disorder is again a weird, problematic word to have.
Yeah, they haven't really progressed. That's why I said, like, it's called gender dysphoria elsewhere. Even in, DSM-5 is called gender dysphoria, but in India it's called gender identity disorder, GID. So you have to get two mental health professionals to certify that, you are trans.
Why mental health professionals?
It's sort of gatekeeping. It's like, oh, gender is psychological, so, you have to get like certificates from psychologists or psychiatrists saying that you're trans, or, you have this gender identity disorder, right? So that happens, and then with that certificate, you can go and change your Aadhaar card and everything to trans, like trans marker, T marker, and then you can start your, like, hormones and everything, and after you have gone through the surgery, that's when you are eligible for M or F marker. Like for trans men or trans masculine people, it's generally top surgery that is considered. For trans feminine people or trans women, it's generally bottom surgery is much more important than top surgery. So yeah, like and the
Is
thing
it
about
biological surgery and like physical parameters to being
there
trans
are de-
very
there are
rigorous?
definitely physical parameters. There are definitely physical and psychological parameters as well to be trans, because unless and until you get these two letters or two certificates from the psychologists, you can't access hormones or anything. A lot of people these days are, accessing hormones from elsewhere.
Yeah, like we talked about in the beginning, how
Yeah, yeah.
medically not correct it is
Yeah,
because
like in India, a lot of people are accessing hormones from elsewhere without saying, like doctors or, so basically someone gets a prescription, and then, like, everyone follows that same prescription. Now, the thing with
Ah,
hormones is it differs from person to person.
Makes sense.
Also with the dosages, it differ from, time to time, person to person. So
It's like one person is accessing medicine and then everybody else is following that routine.
exactly. Like a lot of people are, also, like making Aadhaar cards and everything, reflecting their preferred identity, not in a very legal way, because the way to access it legally is very
Tough, I think. It's
currently.
like jumping a lot of ropes to get something. And if you do not have the access to, you don't have resources, it's very difficult, I feel, to.
Yeah, firstly, it's very difficult, and secondly, not just difficult, also sort of there are definitely a lot of like hoops to jump.
Yes.
But also even with like the trans, so currently the government has started a portal for trans certificates, like, and there's a huge waiting list, right? Like the government has stopped approving trans certificates for now. So there has been a huge waiting list for a while. So people have applied for trans certificates and haven't got it. Like people are applying for it and getting it probably after 1 year, 2 years, right? And then without that trans certificate, you can't do anything. So
No, oh yes, you need a trans certificate to access hormones, and then you're able to get a male female tag based off your surgeries that you.
firstly, without the trans certificate, you wouldn't be able to access a lot of government benefits that exist.
Yes.
Like specifically when it comes to reservations. So some states have like introduced reservations for trans people, right? Without a trans certificate, you can't access any of those benefits. So yeah, I think there are so many sort of barriers, and it's not just like barriers from one end, but barriers from multiple ends. So it's not just like identity based barriers, or like violence based barriers, but it's everything at one go, and then it's like you just don't know, like how to navigate everything.
So when we were talking on the phone, you talked about experiences of your friends as well, right? So who have been done wrong by the system, wrong by the policemen, wrong by people or the circumstances or the situations. So would you like to talk about your friends' experience?
Yeah, it's not just friends, but a lot of people from the community, rather, I would say.
Okay.
Like just when, so I think the entire country knows about the RG Kaur rape case.
Yes.
The entire country knows about it. In the aftermath of it, like just a week after that, so some trans people were assaulted in a metro station by Metro Police, by Railway Police Force (RPF), because Kolkata Metro is under Indian Railways, so RPF. Yeah, and basically what the police officials did was that they touched the breasts of a trans person and said, "Are these real?" Yeah, and then there was a lot of fiasco in the metro station, and all that stuff happened, but that didn't go anywhere. Like we didn't see, like the person who touched the, breasts of a trans person, inquiring whether it's real or not, was never punished, or was never even dismissed from service, or never even suspended even for a day. We don't know what happened. No one knows. And if we don't know anything, then nothing happened. That's for sure.
Of course.
So yeah, I mean, there have been so many instances of this sort, like like people touching the groin area and saying, oh, like what sexual organ do you have, or like, and I think it's just so inbuilt into the system, and also the people who come out from the system, like people here, that for a lot of people this is so normal and natural, right? Like like inquiring, inquiring about whether, like what sexual organs one has, or inquiring about so many like of things that like should be boundaries, should be body boundaries. Again, it comes down to body boundaries, right? Like people don't know about body boundaries, most people don't. So that, and also, yeah, apart from that, the entire confusion about whether what gender someone is something I find very appealing. Like there's always this conversation around what gender someone is by looking at the person, like like, are you male, female, or in between, or like there's so much conversation around like who's what
Curiosity
gender.
also, and wrong curiosity, not even like they're not even respectful, right? So there's a way of asking everything, and there's a way of also correcting yourself if you know that you're hurting somebody's sentiments. But I don't know why we are going to learn. I don't know what to.
Yeah, and it's not just like a lot of people think that, oh, this is what like this is what working class uneducated people do and all that stuff. But this is not. This is I think in my opinion, I have definitely seen like working class people more respectful of things than so-called elite, elite middle
Well
class,
educated,
well
have
educated.
all the resources there are in the world.
Exactly. And this entire thing about, oh, you need to educate us. You need to educate us about things. Like, why do I need to educate you? Like, if you can scroll on Facebook for an entire day, or if you can be on Instagram for the entire day, then you have well access to the internet, and you can easily Google things now. Like, everything is just a click away. And this sort of expectation that, we are always, like, gonna teach people things about ourselves, but do we really need? Like, why do we have to teach people things? Am I being paid for teaching? Am I being paid for teaching you? Like, like, why do you expect free labor from me? And that's what the angle of exploitation also comes in. Like, why should I disperse knowledge just like that? Like, what's this expectation of free labor and, free emotional labor as well? Not just, labor, but also emotional labor. Because I have been to so many of these sessions where, sessions, or, I've been in so many of these conversations where people are apparently willing to learn, but then they would ask the most disrespectful question that, like I've been in conversations where, like, people are talking about, like, we're talking about trans people, and they were like, oh, do trans people have dick or vagina? So ultimately it boils down to, like, what sexual organs do you have? So I mean, I think 5 or 6 years back, I was at a point where, I used to educate people about, things, and, like, I've been in so many other spaces like this, but not anymore. Since the last, I think, 3 4 years, I've stopped completely doing that, because, like, educating someone for free shouldn't be on me. If you want to be educated, then pay me, and, I can educate you. I don't expect free labor from me. Right. So yeah, I mean, I can of course do it for, like, community-based NGOs, queer organizations, and stuff. But, I wouldn't do it for everyone. Right. So
That makes sense. I mean, even if you have to ask questions, you can do it respectfully, right? You don't have to be like, it's like almost asking, it's sad. It's sad how things work. Now we can refer them to our conversation and be like, you want to learn, you better
yeah,
watch through this whole thing and learn.
definitely.
Do you think situation is going to change also? It's a very bogus question. I know there's not going to change, but do you feel hope? Like, how do you, so for somebody who has been through the experiences that you have, how do you make sense of them? So for me, when I'm looking through rape narratives, I find them very triggering myself. I have a hard time sleeping, etc., etc. And one of the things that I've been told and asked is just get over it.
Yeah.
But people, survivors, do not get over it. So, how did you make sense of the exploitation that happened, boundaries that were disrespected, the physical, the mental, the emotional boundaries that were disrespected? And how do you find peace? Is there peace?
I don't think there's peace. I don't really think there's peace.
Or do you like make sense of it, or are you okay with it? So, like, like settle with that feeling, or does it never, by peace, I mean with that, like, do you ever get to terms with it, basically, if not peace?
I don't think I've ever got to terms with it. Like, and I think that is very well reflected in, like, the work that I do as well. Like, yeah, I don't think I've ever got over it. And I don't think anyone can get over it. Like, expecting people to get over things is, again, so dismissive and so, disrespectful. Like, oh, I mean, and it always comes down to experience of sexual violence. No one
Yes,
would
that
say,
is why I asked you this question.
yeah, no one would say, oh, you got beaten by a mob. Oh, that's so sad. Get over it.
Yes,
Oh, you are, like, both of your legs were broken by, this person. Oh, it's so sad. Get over it. But why is it always with experience of sexual violence and rape and, like, that we need to get over it? And why is it all, and especially with marginalized groups, like, why is it always on, women and trans people and queer people to get over things? Like, why do we need to get over things at the first place? Like, we can very well center, our experiences in the middle of conversations. We don't need to get over it or forget it or be like, oh, this is the thing of the past that happened, and, things have changed, and, all that stuff. Because no matter how much people talk about, things have changed so much, and, because I've definitely heard this narrative so many times, oh, trans people are finally getting the respect, and, all that stuff. But the thing is, those are selective spaces
that's true.
that not everyone has access to. Now, if you talk about, like, like a elite posh bar in, in South Delhi, that's not something that everyone has access to, right? Like, change needs to come from, like, the ground, and not from somewhere like elite spaces, elite universities, and, all that stuff. Because not everyone has access to it. Not everyone can access, like, like an elite university, or, like an elite elite bar where, like a gay party is happening, or like a trans meetup is happening, and all that stuff. Not everyone can access that. So yeah, I think change needs to come from, like within firstly, and secondly, I don't think it's a fair expectation of people to, like that, like experiences of sexual, like people who had experience of sexual violence or rape, or, like other forms of violence would just get over it.
So when I read narratives, this is one thing that all these survivors have to go through, that they are expected to be okay with it. And if they're not okay with it, then also there's a problem. If they're okay with it, then it is also a problem. So have you faced that? And like when you talked about that, you told your friends 1.5 years after, or 1 year after what had happened to you, you were able to say, probably put your experiences into words. Did anything change in that process? Or I just want to know your experiences in that
Yeah.
regard. Like,
Yeah.
of course, it shatters you and it changes you completely and all these things, but how
Ye-
was your individual experiences through it?
Yeah, I think, like I definitely have a filter for friends right now. Like not everyone is my friend. People can be acquaintances, but not friends. Yeah, and that has come through a lot of, like experiences, negative experiences. But yeah, I think the circle that I generally engage in and engage with have been respectful of things, because that is also a circle which is sensitive. uh yeah, I think, like there have been many friends who, like I have known before, and like people all say vilest of things, like not even just around sexual violence, but about a lot of other things. For example, when I came out, like someone directly told me that you are doing this to, like you are not, trans, or you are not homosexual or anything. Like you are just doing this to gain attention because it's so fashionable, right? And I was like, okay, like when did being queer become fashionable, firstly? And secondly, why would someone choose the queer experience willingly when it's filled with, like so many negative things, like abuse, violence, like you name it and it's there. Name any negative thing and it's there, right? So yeah, I had definitely this sort of experiences. Like someone even told me that, like someone who I used to consider as a friend from school, like told me, oh, like, oh, you are not a girl, you are a boy. You are like behave like a boy. I'm like, how do you behave like a boy? Tell me that firstly. So there have been many experiences, and I think right now I have a lot of acquaintances, but not everyone is every acquaintance is a friend. Yeah.
I am speechless. I will admit, like, people really have the audacity to say things, to do things, and to not even realize that they're wrong.
Yeah, I mean, people always have opinions, and people are always very vocal about opinions. Like
Especially with the onset of internet, everybody seems to have an opinion on everything, and
yes, and everyone is very vocal about their opinions. Like, like I think with the onset of internet, everything, like, look, everything that is happening around is complex. Like, society can't be reduced into a binary, right? But with the onset of internet, everything has been reduced to, like, sort of consumable chunks.
yes,
Like, if it is binary, it is consumable. Like the clear good, bad, the clear,
I think you mean digestible, right?
yeah, it's consumable and digestible.
Digestible.
Yeah. And I think what it has done is basically, reduced every sort of complexity into like simplistic narratives.
Which erases experiences which are, say,
Yes,
does not conform to what is thought of as experiences.
exactly.